Extra starts off by playing a Bountiful Promenade, while Sam decides to put down Rejuvenating Springs. John plays Haunted Ridge tapped, and Tom simply grows a forest. Extra plays Tainted Field, and then casts 3 visits, fetching himself an Overgrown Tomb, paying 2 life, and then finishing off his turn with casting Viscera Seer. Sam plays an island, and casts Farseer, fetching himself a Ketria Triumph. With that, he passes the turn to John. John plays Tainted Field, and casts Talisman of Conviction, then passes to Tom. Tom plays his second forest, then casts Nature's Lore, fetching himself an Overgrown Tomb, deciding to put it into play tapped, then passing his turn. Extra takes his turn, plays a forest, and casts Nature's Lore, getting himself another forest. He then proceeds to cast Master Chef, ending his turn and passing to Sam. Sam then takes his turn, plays a forest of his own, then continues and casts Eureka Moment, drawing 2 and putting down a Cragged Crown Pathway. With that, he passes to John. John plays a Sundown Pass and casts its commander, Kaalia of the Vast. He then passes his turn to Tom. Tom starts his turn with casting his commander, Skullbriar, the Walking Grave, then moves to combat and swings with Skullbriar at Sam for 1 damage, triggering Skullbriar, gaining him a 1/1 counter. With that, he ends his turn, passing to Extra. Extra starts the turn with casting his commander, GHAVE Riku of Spores, who enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter due to Master Chef. With nothing else, he passes the turn to Sam. Sam takes his turn and casts his commander, Riku of Two Reflections, then passes his turn to John. John plays a Plains, then moves to combat, turning Kaalia at Sam. Kaalia triggers, and he puts down a Chroma, Angel of Wrath, tapped and attacking Sam. Sam takes 8, and in his second main phase, he casts Fire Main Commando, and passes the turn to Tom. Tom plays a forest per turn, then casts Forgotten Ancient. He then moves to combat, and attacks Sam with his commander, dealing 2 damage, and triggering Skullbriar, putting a 1/1 counter on himself. He then passes his turn to Extra. Extra casts Kutzel, Malamet Exemplar, which enters with a +1/+1 counter due to Master Chef, and also triggers Forgotten Ancient, putting a 1/1 counter on itself. He then moves to combat, swinging at John with GHAVE Riku of Spores, dealing 6 damage, and drawing a card off Kutzel's trigger. He then plays Sandstep Citadel tapped, and passes the turn to Sam. Sam then plays Rockfall Vale as his land for turn, then casts 3 visits, triggering Forgotten Ancient, putting a 1/1 counter on himself. Sam then pays a blue and a red to copy 3 visits, and fetching himself 2 forests. He continues by casting Rampant Growth, again triggering Forgotten Ancient, and paying to copy Rampant Growth, fetching 2 more tapped islands. He then passes the turn to John. John takes his turn, and immediately goes to combat. He swings with a Chroma and Fire Main Commando at Sam, and Kaalia at Extra, triggering Kaalia, and putting down Archfiend of Depravity, tapped and attacking at Extra, while drawing a card for the Fire Main Commando trigger. Sam takes 10, and Extra takes 7 damage. In his second main, he casts Youthful Valkyrie, triggering Forgotten Ancient, gaining a 1/1 counter. He then passes the turn to Tom. In Tom's upkeep, Forgotten Ancient triggers, and Tom decides to move 4 counters to Skullbriar. He then casts 3 visits, fetching himself a forest, and triggers Forgotten Ancient, gaining a 1/1 counter. He then casts Dustfang Mentor, putting a lifelink counter on Skullbriar with its ETB ability. This also triggers Forgotten Ancient, who gets an additional 1/1 counter. Tom then moves to combat, attacking Sam with Forgotten Ancient and Skullbriar. This triggers Fire Main, letting Tom draw a card. Sam takes the 9 damage, and Skullbriar triggers, putting a 1/1 counter on itself. For the end of turn, Extra activates his commander GHAVE 2 times, making 2 sapling tokens that enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. And for the end of his turn, Tom sacrifices Dustfanged Mentor to the Archfiend of Depravity trigger. Extra starts his turn off by playing Sunpellet Grove as his land for turn. He then casts Moldervine Reclamation, triggering Forgotten Ancient. Extra then casts Utopium Icon, who enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter due to Master Chef. He then proceeds to activate GHAVE, remove a counter from a sapling, making a 1/1 sapling that enters with a +1/+1 counter due to Master Chef. He then activates Utopium Icon to sacrifice the sapling without a counter, adding 1 green mana to the pool, drawing a card, and gaining 1 life due to Moldervine Reclamation. He then repeats this loop until he has 27 cards left in his library. He then casts Cryptic Trilobite for X = 0. The Trilobite enters with a 1/1 counter because of Master Chef. He then activates Trilobite, removing a counter and adding 2 colorless mana for abilities. The Trilobite dies. Extra then activates GHAVE 2 more times, removing a counter from Utopium Icon and a sapling, making 2 saplings with a 1/1 counter. He then activates Utopium Icon, sacrificing the saplings without counters to add 2 green mana, triggering Moldervine 2 times, drawing 2 and gaining 2. He casts Agatha's Soul Cauldron. After that, he activates Cauldron, exiling the Trilobite, putting a counter on GHAVE. He then activates a sapling, removing a 1/1 counter to add 2 colorless mana for abilities. After that, he activates GHAVE 2 more times, removing a counter from GHAVE and a sapling, making 2 saplings with a counter. Then, he activates Utopium Icon 3 times, sacrificing 3 saplings without a counter to make 3 white mana, and trigger Moldervine 3 more times, gaining 3 and drawing 3. He then casts Generous Gift to destroy his Moldervine Reclamation. He then activates his Beast to remove a 1/1 counter and add 2 mana for abilities. With this mana, he activates GHAVE 2 more times to remove 2 counters from saplings, making 2 more saplings. Then finally, he activates Utopium Icon 2 more times for 2 black mana, and with that 2 black mana, casts Blood Artist. And with the Blood Artist in play, repeats the loop until all of his opponents are dead.